Hello and welcome to this second lesson in this beginner Excel tutorial series. My name is Ray and today we'll be taking a look at some basic formulas, including counting and summing, and also how to present our data visually in a chart. So let's take a more detailed look at the learning objectives for today's session. We'll learn how to count cells and their contents, including when cells are blank and numbers versus text. We'll learn how to sum a range of numbers, or add together previous counts that we've made of other data. We'll learn how to conditionally count, i.e. count data based on specific criteria. And we'll also learn how to present our data visually in simple charts. So if you haven't done so already, go ahead and open the file that we created in lesson 1. So here we are back at our simple registration sheet. Now what we're going to focus on today is looking at some simple formulas which will allow us to count the data here in various different ways. So let's imagine we wanted to count the number of students that we had in total on the register. So our list that we have at the moment is a very short list, and that would be a simple task if we just went 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We can do it very, very easily and quickly. But imagine if the list was extremely long. It would take us a long time to do this. So Excel has a number of different counting formulas that we can use to perform this task. So let's take a look at them now. To enter a formula, you must start by pressing the equals sign. Once you've pressed equals, you can now type in a formula. So if you don't know what the formulas are, this can be problematic. But you can see here, up in the top left here, we've got something which is called functions in the box. And if you click on this down arrow here, it will list some of the common functions that we maybe have used recently. But you can click on more functions, and you can now get this pop-up where you can describe what it is that you want to do. So let's say I want to count cells. Cool. And okay, so now it's given us a list of different formulas for counting. So we've got count, count A, count blank, and some other count functions. But we're just going to focus on these first 3 to start with to see what the difference is. So if we double click now on count, it will now populate count as we see here under this table, and it's asking us for a value 1 or a value 2. So what we're going to do at the moment is we're just going to cancel that, and we're just going to go back into this cell. We'll type equals count, and if we open a bracket, you can see here the formula is progressing in the formula bar, and we're going to select this range here of names from A2 to A7. We can see now a range is displayed in the formula, and a range is always defined as the first item and the last item with a colon between it, so the 2 dots there. If we now close the bracket on that formula, this will complete the formula, so equals count A2, A7. We press enter, and unusually now what we see is a 0. So if we now go back and have a look and see actually what the explanation of the count formula was. So we can see here it counts the number of cells in a range that contains numbers. So this is something that's important to remember, is the basic count function only counts cells with numbers. So if you have cells that are full of text, it's going to return a 0 as it's done in this instance. So let's put in a different description here, count cells with text. And let's click go again. So it's given us count if, which will work, but we don't want to be looking at that yet. Let's just go back to say count cells. So this function here, count A. So count A, the description of that is counts the number of cells in a range that are not empty. So this sounds much more like what it is that we want to do. So let's click OK. So again, it's going to look for a set of values here. So if you click on this arrow in the prompt cell, it's now going to allow us to enter in what it is that we want to count. So let's again select A2 to A7. We can see here it's going to count A2 to A7. And it's actually telling us now what it's going to look at. We have the cells with John, Jane, Janet, James, Adam, etc. Now, those of you who are more observant will notice actually that in the formula bar here, we actually have equals count plus this function. And that's because we'd already typed count into the cell before we used the function locator. So what we'll do is we'll just get rid of that before we go any further by clicking in the formula bar, just backspacing. And now we've got equals count A, A2 to A7. So let's click OK. And there we go. You can see it's counted 6, and that's from A2 to A7. So that was very simple. So one of the most powerful things that Excel can do is it can copy an existing formula and take a guess at what you want to do with it in the rest of your table. So in the same way that we copied data in our table down columns earlier with the yes, we can copy things across to make Excel guess what it is. So let's say we wanted to count everything in column B and everything in column C. We would simply click on this cell here where we've got the formula. Again, hover over the bottom right hand side of the cell where the small green square is till your cursor turns into that plus shape, and then drag across. And there we go, we've got a result of 6 for each column. And if we look at the formulas closely, now in cell B10, we can see it's counting the range B2 to B7. If you highlight it in the formula bar, it actually nicely colours it in on your table so that you can see exactly what's happening. But just be careful when you've done anything selected in the formula bar here that you press enter afterwards before clicking anywhere else. So let's look here. So again, it is guessed here. It's now counting C2 to C7 and it's getting a result of 6. So that's a useful function, but what if we only wanted to count specific things within cells? So let's imagine the 2 of our people within our attendance did not attend. So let's put a no against Jane Doe and a no against James student. So the basic count function now doesn't change because it's counting everything that's in those cells. What we need to do is count based on specific criteria. And to do that, we use the COUNTIF function. So again, what we do is just type equals, and then if we type COUNTIF, and what it's telling us here is it needs a range and criteria. So let's give it our range of C2 to C7, and we can see there. And then the criteria needs to be separated from the range by a comma. So we press a comma. Now we can see in bold here, it's asking us for some criteria. So what criteria do we need to specify for this? Well, if we wanted to count all of the yeses, for example, we would specify that we want to count the text string yes by entering yes in speech marks like this. Speech marks, yes, speech marks. Now it's important that it matches exactly as it appears in the table, otherwise it's not going to count it. So again, close the brackets around the formula, and there we go. So we can see it's counted 4 yeses, 1, 2, 3, 4. And again, if we copied that all the way across, now what we see now is, oh, why have we got a 0 now in these other columns? Well, if you look now and remember how the formula copied across, you can now see that instead of counting in column C, which is where we started the count, in this next cell, it's now counting what's in column D. So it's making a guess that we're moving across columns. But there's nothing in column D, so it's returning 0. So this is just something that you have to be careful of when you're moving formulas around or copying them from one place to another, is to make sure that you are specifying a range that you need to count in and that that range hasn't moved when you move the formula. Now, there is a methodology where we can fix a range, and let's see how to do that. So if instead in this formula here, where we've got C2 to C7, if we precede each element with a dollar sign, so a $C $2 and a $C $7, this will then fix the range, and when we copy the formula, that range will not change. Let's just see that in example. Click away from that, and now if we copy the formula across like we did before, we can see now that it's returned the answer of 4 for each cell. And that's because we can see now this range has not changed in any of the formulas. So that's a useful way of fixing a reference for a formula, and that's important when you only want to ever count in a specific place and you don't want Excel to make a guess on what happens next. The limitations of this formula are if, for example, we added in another yes here, we can now see that this is not going to update because it's only going to do C2 to C7. It's not going to update based on any new data. So that's just something to watch out for. So another function that we can count, and something that you have to be very careful of, we're just going to delete that data there, is missing data. So if we delete one of these, and now we say equals, same thing we did before, if we say equals count A, right, so again this is going to count, it's going to come back with 5 because there's only 5 things within it, and sometimes you would need to count the blanks for some reason, and we just use an alternative formula which is called count blank equals count blank, and in the same way we put our range in. There we go. So now we have the blank attributed. So let's just delete those formulas for now, and we'll put our no back in this cell. So now let's have a look at doing something a little bit more useful with the formulas that we've learned. Let's imagine that we want to produce a summary chart of our attendance data, so something visual that shows the amount of people who've attended versus those who haven't. So what we're going to need first is to compile a set of data that captures that. So we're going to need a count of the people who did attend and a count of those who didn't. So let's just set up a small separate table to capture this data for now. So if we go to this cell F1, and we'll call it as attendance summary. And we're going to need a yes count and a no count. And what we'll do in the same way as we did before is we'll use the COUNTIF formula to count based on the criteria. So we type the equal sign, type COUNTIF, open a bracket, select the range that we want to count, and we put in a comma, and then tell it the criteria. Now before we typed in the word yes to count it, but what we're going to do this time is click on the cell E2. So E2 has the word yes in it. So this is a much better way of doing it because it avoids any potential typos that you might do when you type in the formula. Cell E2 is not going to change unless we change it, and it has the word yes in that's exactly the same as the word yes within column C that you want to count. So if we close our bracket now, and we can see there it comes back with a count of 4, which is correct, we can see. So we could go ahead and type exactly the same formula and reference cell E3 for the word no. But instead what we're going to do is copy this down from the first formula that we typed. So again, hover over the little green square till it changes to a plus and drag it down into the next cell. Now you can see here we've got a result of 2. But this seems strange because we were supposed to be counting the yeses, and this is something important to understand when you're copying formulas. So we can see again in the top left here, the cell formula that's here is it's now counting C3 to C8, and it's counting with reference to cell E3, which we can see highlighted in red there. So what it's done is because we've copied the formula down, is it's moved the range down and it's also moved the reference cell down. So we don't actually want to move the range. We always want to count the same range. So we'll fix that using the dollar reference signs that we used before. However, it was okay that it moved the actual criteria range. So it moved it from cell E2 to E3. So we could leave that one alone. But let's go ahead and we'll fix it in the first formula by placing the dollar signs in front of C2 and C7. What we'll also do is we'll fix it in front of E2 for now. And so what you'll see happen this time when we copy the formula down, it will keep the range and the cell reference the same. So what do you think will be the result in cell F3? Take a moment to think about it. So it's going to count the yeses again, isn't it? So it's just going to give us exactly the same result, and we'll have to change that afterwards. But let's go ahead and do it. There we go, we have the same result. And this is because now in cell F3, it's still counting the number of yeses from E2. We click here, we can see it's still counting E2. So let's change that to E3, so it counts the no's. And there we go, we've now got a result of the yeses and the no's. So let's imagine that we were counting quite a lot of things and we wanted to have an overall result of how many there were in total. Now, this sum is very easy to complete. It's 4 plus 2, it's 6. But imagine if you had lots of numbers and lots of different criteria, then you might need some help to do that. So let's put another just reference header here. Let's call it total. And let's use a different formula, which is called sum equals sum, open brackets. And again, all you have to do with this formula is select the range of numbers that you want to add up, close the bracket, and there we go. It gives us a sum. So what we want to do now is we want to represent this data visually. So I'm just going to delete that sum data for now. We've seen that functionality, we don't really need that. And if we just highlight everything that's got our table data in, yeah, so from cell E1 to F3, we'll see there this little icon that appears at the bottom right hand corner. And this is called quick analysis. Now, quick analysis does a lot of things for us instantaneously, and it's a great tool to get a quick result out of data, though it might not always represent the data exactly how you want it. But in this case, we're just going to use it just to show how it works. So if you left click on that, you can see we have some options here for formatting, charts, totals, tables, and sparklines. For this session, we're just going to focus on this charts bit here. So let's just click on that. And you can see here it gives us a selection of clustered column, it gives us a preview, a pie chart, and a bar chart type. So let's pick the pie chart. I think that's the best representation of our data. And we left click on that, and there we go. We've got an instant visual representation of the data that we have. We have the yeses here represented in blue, and the no's here represented in orange. Now what you can't see on this chart is the actual numbers, but you can do that by formatting the chart in a different way. So let's have a look and see how to do that. So the quickest and easiest way to make any changes to our chart data elements is to click on the plus sign here next to the highlighted chart. So we can see here there are small checkboxes for the chart title, data labels, and legend. So the chart title is obviously where it says attendance summary at the top, so we can take that off and put it back. The legend is the yes, no small text at the bottom. So again, we could take that off and put it back. And the data labels is what we want. So it gives us a preview of what we're going to see here. So if we have data labels on, we can see now we actually have the numerical values of what it is that we were recording. So we can see that there were 4 yeses in blue and 2 no's in orange. If we weren't happy with the selection of chart type, we can simply change it by left clicking on the chart so that the border is highlighted there, right clicking on it, and we can select this option from the drop down, change chart type. So now we could pick perhaps a 3D pie chart, very nice, or we could pick a bar chart, this one here, and you can simply select however you want the data presented. You can resize the chart by dragging the handles here. You can even copy and paste it to another sheet and it will still remember the base data. So let's just show that. So let's just rename this sheet for a second from sheet 1 to register. Let's create a new sheet by clicking on the plus sign down here next to the tab. And we'll rename that one by right clicking on it, selecting rename, and we'll call this one chart. So we go back to our register. We can right click on the chart. We can cut it, which will cut it out of this sheet, but keep it in the memory. Go to chart. And if we just select the first paste, select destination theme. And we can see there now that this chart now exists on the page on its own. And if we go and update the data here, so for example, let's put some more no's in. So we can see our table here changes. It's kept dynamically based on what we have in this table. And our chart now updates automatically. So very powerful tool. So before we wrap up this lesson, I want to spend a little bit time talking about what happens when our data changes. In most cases, your data will not stay static. You will add in new entries and there'll be new things to count. And right now, our formula is static, so it doesn't matter if we add new data, we'll only ever be counting cells C2 to C7. So we can show that. So for example, if we just highlight a couple of rows here, drag down the data again, so we've got lots more data here. There we go. So neither our count of yeses nor nos changes based on the extra data that we've got. So what we could do is we could alter the formula here in F2. We could change it from counting to C2 to C7 to counting to down to cell C32, we can see there. So we could type in 32 and we can see there. Alternatively, what we could have done was we could just grab this little blue box here in the corner, and when it changes to the diagonal arrow there, we can then drag that down and we can see there that now updates the range there. Alternatively, you could wipe out the range completely. Let's just grab that. Let's make sure we don't grab that bracket. So if we just backspace there and then select the range again, there we go, and it's back in. Notice how when we reselect the range, it doesn't appear with the dollar signs anymore. So those are a variety of things that we could do to update the range, but we're going to enter the same problem again now. So if we enter any more data after row 32, we're going to have to change it again. So how do we get round that? What we can do is we can just count anything that's in column C. And we do that by entering $C $C into the range. And now we can see, if I scroll down here, you can see now it's just going to count everything that's in column C forever and ever. So whatever we add in here will always be counted. The only thing you have to be careful about when you're doing this is obviously that your header does not contain any of the same criteria that you're trying to count, otherwise it will be included. But now if you press enter now, we can see we've got 15. And we can do the same now for our no's. We can just delete these number references here. And there we go. And now our data will be dynamically updated as we add new entries. Likewise, because these numbers have changed here, we'll be able to see on our chart, we can see there now it's added in the extra information in our chart. And that's everything I wanted to cover in today's lesson, so let's take a moment to review what we learned today. So we used the count, count A and count blank functions to count cells dependent on whether they had something in them, whether they were a number, or whether they were blank. We learned how to add up a range of numbers using the sum function. We learned how to conditionally count based on criteria using COUNTIF. And we used the quick analysis tool to produce a range of charts to present our data in an easy to understand visual way. I hope you found the content in today's tutorial useful, and if you did like it, then do hit that thumbs up, subscribe to the channel to make sure that you don't miss future ones. Why not supplement your study with an excellent book, the link of which is in the description below this video. Also, feel free to leave a comment. I've been Ray, and I hope to see you in the next lesson.